Hello everyone, welcome to the Bad Vibes Club podcast. I'm back with a conversation with the writer Lars Iyer. Lars is a bit of a hero of mine. He's written 5 books of fiction, the 3 books in the Spurious trilogy, which were auto-fictional accounts of the trials and tribulations of 2 academic philosophers. His last book, Wittgenstein Jr., about a group of students at Cambridge and a new tutor that they affectionately nickname Wittgenstein Jr., and his new book, Nietzsche and the Burbs, about a group of teenagers in the last year of school who take a new student under their wing, giving him the nickname of Nietzsche. His books are comic, poignant and full of ideas. In this podcast we talk about Nietzsche and the Burbs, his new book, which is set in Wokingham where Lars grew up. We also talk about his ideas for his next book, which will be set in Manchester where Lars studied. We talk about method, we talk about Lars's early mornings and the music he listens to as he writes, and Lars reveals the tremendous amount of words he actually puts down on paper before he edits them down to make the stories that are finally published. We also talk about Hello Magazine, the pleasures of drinking in Poland, and Thomas Bernhard. And for anyone who wants to know the name of the Agamben book that comes up in conversation later, I googled it and I think it is called The Time That Remains. So I strongly advise that you buy and read Lars's entire back catalogue, Nietzsche and the Burbs, Wittgenstein Jr. and the 3 books in the Spurious trilogy. At some point in this interview, Lars claims to have a misanthropic streak, but I thoroughly enjoyed his company and I hope you do too. You're the first writer I've had on the podcast.
Okay, yeah.
So as I mentioned just before we started, I'm quite interested in method. But,
yeah, sure.
But for contemporary artists, that normally involves talking about ideas, sometimes philosophy, sometimes theory. But for you as a writer, you're kind of mired in that theory. And how do you separate the content from the method and your work as a philosopher from that as a writer of fiction?
Well, the important thing is to achieve a kind of lightness with respect to the material. There's this wonderful story, which I'll retell now. There's a poet. I'm not sure where this poet lived or what it was he did exactly, but he's called Abu Nawas. And Abu Nawas went to the great chief poet of his country. And he said to the great chief poet, I would like to write poetry in the grand style. And the great chief poet said to him, okay, off you go, Abu Nawas, and you can learn about the various verse forms, you can begin to compose, off you go. So off he went. Off went Abu Nawas to practice these various verse forms and learn about new verse forms. And he came back to the grand poet and he said to the grand poet, right, I've learned all these things now. I've learned the 1,000 verse forms. I've practiced these things for a number of years. Have I now got permission to compose poetry? And the great chief poet said, now you have to go back and you've got to forget every single thing you've learnt. And Abu Nawas went off. It took him several more years to forget everything, and he came back to the chief poet and said, I've forgotten everything. I learnt it, and now I've forgotten it. So when he came back to the chief poet, he asked, can I now compose poetry? And the chief poet said, yes, now you can write. So the point here is that you have to forget what you know, forget what you've learnt. Now, I'm someone who began as an academic philosopher. I was an academic philosopher for about 20 years. And I read a lot of academic philosophy and non-academic philosophy. I taught this stuff and spent many years trying to ponder the works of various philosophers, trying to work out what was going on in the works of those philosophers. But what was crucial when it came to writing fiction was that I learned how to forget all that heaviness, everything I'd learnt. I needed to forget everything that had weighed me down. I needed to become free of that burden in order to write fiction. And that's been my method, really. At the heart of my method is a quest for lightness. And the idea behind lightness is you leave that heavy stuff behind. You leave it behind and you try and break open a new path. Because that's what method means. It means path. It means opening some new path. And this path is something I wanted to be fundamentally light. I wanted to feel unburdened.
I was wondering, I had lots of different questions about Nietzsche and the Burbs, and a lot of them end up being about adolescence. Why did it seem so appropriate to write about Nietzsche's philosophy, well, not write about Nietzsche's philosophy, but to kind of feature Nietzsche's philosophy or aspects of it, particularly nihilism, within the milieu of adolescence?
Adolescents do not have a strong stake in the world as it currently exists. They're in between childhood and adulthood. As children, they felt secure and comforted by the presence of their parents in a context of society which was, for them, unquestioned. But once you become an adolescent, once you become a teenager, you begin to question. That questioning dies down once you reach adulthood. Once you have a job, once you have a mortgage, once you have relationships of various kinds, then that questioning is no longer as intense, it's no longer as focused. So that's what adolescence is for me. It's that period in life when you're not invested strongly in the adult world, and you've been deprived of the security of the world you knew as a child. As an adolescent, you can question, you can ask yourself about the state of the world, and you can ask yourself how it might be changed.
What was your relationship to Nietzsche? When did you first read his philosophy? Was that as an adolescent for you that you first came across it?
I think you stumble across Nietzsche as an adolescent. Many people do. I remember stumbling across this stuff. Yeah. And the problem with Nietzsche is it's so readable, you gulp it down. You gulp it down, you think you understand it, you think you can grasp it. The point about Nietzsche is, yes, you can read it in that way, you can consume Nietzsche, but that doesn't mean you've actually read Nietzsche or engaged with his work seriously. There's only when you come to it after some years reading other things, reading in history of philosophy, reading about the history of religion and the sciences, reading in general. After you come to Nietzsche, after you've gone through that process and you come to Nietzsche, it's a very different experience. There you can understand exactly what Nietzsche's striking against, what he's arguing against. You understand why he's such a radical. And that's the thing for Nietzsche, for me then, is that we consume him too easily. Nietzsche should be something difficult to read, something we take time over. And that's what I think I came to after several years of studying philosophy. I came to Nietzsche as someone who could understand better, I think, what he was arguing against, what he was struggling against.
Thinking about method, I kind of go back to Nietzsche for lots of ideas. The thing I like about him a lot is the method, right, of genealogy, this particular histories of ideas which you build up in order to, I don't know what the phrase would be, but to rail against them normally. So I wonder if there's something interesting there, because the adolescents, the group of teenagers in your book, they engage with the philosophy of Nietzsche through the character of Nietzsche in this very grand but quite surface level way. And there's an interesting kind of critique that plays out within the group about how seriously those ideas of, I don't know, of despair or of suicide or of nihilism are being taken.
Yeah, genealogy in Nietzsche's work shakes up our assurances about categories we normally regard to be sacrosanct. So ideas such as dignity or goodness or evil or what's worthwhile or not worthwhile, these are subject to great scrutiny in Nietzsche's work, and particularly in that book called The Genealogy of Morality. In that work, what Nietzsche does is trace the origins of these terms and show how they began in very confused times, out of struggles, out of clashes between different groups of people. So what you're doing, you're denaturalising what you take to be natural, what you take to be eternal. You're historicising what you think is has always been the case. You're taking these words which form part of our morality, and you are altering them in some way. Now, what I find in the adolescent, this is maybe my idealised adolescent, what an adolescent needs to do, and particularly perhaps a queer adolescent, is invent ancestors for her or himself, to invent a past, to conjure up from the past exemplars, people whose lives you can imitate, people whose lives give you a clue as to how you might live your own life. This is something I think is particularly acute for queer youth, people who don't have a pattern, don't have a paradigm, don't have around them someone to follow. They've got to discover for themselves how they might live. And this genealogical method is wonderful because it shakes our certainty that the world as we find it is the world as it actually could be. And this is what adolescents, I think, are particularly attuned to. Things could be different. Things don't have to be the way that they are. And to that extent, I think, the adolescent constructs a genealogy of her or his own, finding heroes, finding ancestors where there's a lack of people around them to show them how they might live.
I was just thinking about Nietzsche and the Burbs, and then also Wittgenstein Jr. And you've got a plan for another book in this series, right? What's the third book?
The third book's called Simone. Well, the working title's Simone Weil. I'm not sure if I'll keep that title.
Okay.
And it's a book in a similar vein to Nietzsche and the Burbs. You've asked me some questions about method, and interestingly enough, the question of method is absolutely central to Simone Weil. In that novel, it's about a bunch of PhD students in Manchester. In that novel, what these PhD students are trying to work out is a method to follow, both in their own PhD research, in the writing they're doing on various aspects of philosophy, but also in life in general. And one of the things they're subjected to is classes in method at their university. They go through classes on method where they're told how to manage their time, how to balance their workload, how to structure their chapters, how to put together an argument. actually for them, for my characters, they're being told how to live. And what they're trying to do in that novel is to struggle for another path, another way to do things, another way to live. Like all my characters, and this is similar with Wittgenstein Jr., Nietzsche and the Burbs, what all my characters are looking for is what we might understand as an ethics, or the ethical, or an ethos. Here this should be understood not simply in terms of rules, of norms, it's not a question here of morality. It's a question how you can dwell on the earth, how you can find a place where you can live, where you can find a place where you don't have to sacrifice that which you regard to be important. So what all my characters are looking for is perhaps, I don't know if I can call it this, but some kind of home, some way of living with other people in a collective. That's what all my characters are looking for. And in my novel, Simone Weil, or whatever it ends up being called, I'm thinking of the title Disaster Studies for it. And whatever the novel might be called, the characters are always looking for an ethos.
Is there a real course called Disaster Studies?
I made up this course, and this course is a branch of philosophy.
Okay.
And the lead character in Simone Weil is called Donnie, and Donnie is very interested in the idea of the disaster, and that's what he talks about. There's an open question as to what the disaster might mean. Does it mean all the terrible things that happened in the 20th century? Does it mean the detonation of the atom bomb? Or is it something we can track further back? Does the disaster begin with the invention of the steam engine? Or can we take it right back to the plantations, to the Middle Passage, to the wake of those slave ships crossing the Atlantic? So the question as to what the disaster might be is open in my new novel. Of course, one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of the disaster are the writings of Maurice Blanchot, and Blanchot wrote a book called The Writing of the Disaster. That's also in the back of my mind. It is to have my kind of reckoning with Blanchot's thought in that book. So under the heading of the disaster, I want to group these various things together and see what happens.
It's nice thinking about when you position the disaster, kind of realigns history and also the future. So I wonder if the idea of adolescents or queer adolescents who are having to write their own histories also then helps them write a future as well.
That's right. So your relationship to your past, the construction of a genealogy, selecting heroes, heroines. Say in Nietzsche and the Burbs, Paula chooses what's her name now? Nadia Tolokno, I think that might be it. Other characters choose Kurt Cobain, Arturo Rimbaud. So you're picking people from the past who then might show you how to live in the present, how you might live in the future. If I think of the character Paula, she's an important character in the novel. What she's looking for is a queer bohemia, a queer way of living in the city with other people like her. And she hasn't got that in Nietzsche and the Burbs. That's what she's looking for. She's sending up her distress flares, but they haven't actually summoned anybody yet. So Paula's someone who's looking forward to going off to university. She's actually going to study at Manchester, studying fine arts. And when she gets there, she wants to be able to construct this community, to build a community around her where she feels she can live, not just in a safe way. Safe is this word, overused at the moment. It's not about that. It's about trying to overcome herself in some way, to be more than who she is. That's what she's looking for in her queer bohemia.
I was reading. Have you ever read Lucy Ellman?
I haven't actually. No.
I was reading her and reading about her, and she loves Thomas Bernhard, and Thomas Bernhard is someone that I really love.
Oh, wonderful!
And Bernhard is a great user of italics, and Lucy Ellman is also a great user of italics, and you were a brilliant user of italics.
Okay, great.
And I wonder, this is quite a strange question, but in relation to method, like, how do you feel about italics? Where did you take that? Did you take that from your reading of someone else, or did you? Yeah, they're just such an interesting stylistic device. But I wondered what your thoughts on italics.
Yeah, Thomas Bernhard is the single greatest influence on my work. And I'm very much a post-Bernhardian writer. So Bernhard is the absolute beginning of everything I do. Forget the novelists like, I've been compared recently to Martin Amis and Kingsley Amis and all these sorts of people. They have no bearing whatsoever on my work. I never really read them, to be honest. Bernhard is where it all begins from. And what Bernhard's work means to me, it means so many things. One of the things it means to me is music, it's rhythm. It's Bernhard's brilliant rhythms, the rhythm of his prose, which I find so intoxicating, so wonderful. And in my own work, what I'm also looking for is a kind of music, a rhythm. When I write, I get up early in the morning to write. So when I write, everything's written, everything comes out of this rhythm. And as part of that rhythm, I want emphases of various kinds. And the italics give me those emphases. So when a reader's reading it, they've got an idea of how it's supposed to sound, how it's supposed to flow. I also think here of rappers and rappers flow and emphasis in rap music, in hip hop. And so emphasis for me is absolutely crucial, and that's the role the italics serve primarily, is part of rhythm. And rhythm is very much part of this method which I follow. What I want every morning when I get up early to write is just to be carried away on that rhythm. And my notebooks, I write in longhand. My notebooks are far more rhythmical than the actual work I produce. Because the work I produce, what I tend to do is to cut things up into dialogues. I break up this rhythm. But my work, as I write it in the mornings, it looks much more like, a version of Bernhard than what I publish.
What's your routine then? What's your writing routine? When you get up in the morning, what time are we talking?
Well, at the moment I'm getting up really, really early. I wake up about 3.
No way.
I'm up at 4.
Wow.
This has been for the last 6 weeks or so. I can't help it. It means I'm very tired because I don't go to bed early. So I'm actually very tired in general. And this is part of the whole promotion thing, doing promotional tours and giving interviews and writing things for the paper in connection with Nietzsche and the Burbs. But rather than experiencing this as something difficult, when it comes to writing, it's been actually wonderfully liberating. And I've got a whole new routine. Previously I get up at 5:30. That seems decadent to me now. At 4 in the morning, I'm getting up, 4 in the morning, I come downstairs, and I put on some music. I put on, in particular, over the last 6 weeks, it's been John Coltrane. There's a wonderful box set release of his live recordings in Europe from 1962. I just put on a disc of that in the morning, and I follow it up with other things by Coltrane. And Coltrane has been just wonderful because, again, it's that rhythm in his work, the way he's soloing. I find his example incredibly inspiring, and I find the music very, very exhilarating to listen to. But I'm in danger of getting burnt out. There's been too many early mornings lately. So this morning when I got up, what I didn't feel, it was the customary intensity of feeling. I want that intensity of feeling. And once you lose that, then the work I produce isn't of great interest. I want intensity. I want Coltrane-like intensity.
I write for some of my artwork, and I find that if I have that intensity of feeling, it gives me a great drive to work. But sometimes I have to write without having that intensity of feeling. And actually what's sobering for me is to look back on those different bits of work and realise that neither one is better than the other. It's just the feeling I had was so much more exciting when I was feeling intense and driven to do the work. But you do find there is an actual difference in your output as well.
Because it's when you're writing a section, for example in Nietzsche and the Burbs, the section which takes place in a pub. The pub's called The Ship. It's actually in my hometown of Wokingham. And the section written to try and give an account of what it's like to go on boring evenings into the ship. I spent my entire adolescence doing that sort of thing. It's a very, very boring time. And in order to access that experience, I had to reach a kind of maximal intensity in my work. So over and over again, morning after morning after morning after morning, I drove myself into a frenzy of hatred and fury, which actually comes very easily to me. I'm a very calm, mild-mannered person, but superficially, I'm actually incredibly misanthropic and unreasonable inside. So I'm able to access this intensity with great, great ease. Tiny things irritate me beyond measure. I would never think of showing this in my ordinary life. I don't think anyone could guess my irritations and how irritated I get. But writing is something I can draw on these irritations. Just a chance encounter with someone, the way someone says hello to me, and the tiny things. I would never show this in ordinary life, but I can access that anger and fury in my work. It's very easy for me to get into that anger and fury, and it's a wonderful gift. And what that does, it unifies what I'm writing. So when I was writing that material on the ship, I had to enter that state many times. And I wrote, I don't know how many words. What I tend to do in my novels is edit down something much, much, much longer. Nietzsche and the Burbs is about 100,000 words long. What I wrote for Nietzsche and the Burbs is about 1.3 million words, 1.4 million, something like that. I just edit and edit and edit and cut and cut.
You wrote around 1.3 million words?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, wow. So Nietzsche and the Burbs, every single section is much, much, much longer than appears on the page. And what I'm trying to do in editing is get a crispness and a succinctness. There's no need for me to try to do what someone like Thomas Bernhard does and write these wonderful, wonderful monologues. In fact, I'm always a bit disappointed in my monologues. They're not quite structured enough. I always dream of writing these monologues, but I can't quite carry it off. So what I try to do in my work is to be very, very precise and very controlled. So even though I can access all this fury and anger very easily, my editing skills are incredibly important here. I have to cut. A novel like Wittgenstein Jr. was the beginning of this for me. The first 3 novels I wrote weren't written in that way. But Wittgenstein Jr., I wrote it and submitted it at about twice the length that it is now. And, my partner, my wife, is a fantastic editor. She just cut every scene in half. Cut. And it's a great lesson. I think so many scenes in fiction are cliche. They're boring. We've seen them before in 1,000 soap operas and on evening TV. So for me, it's cutting as much as you possibly can to get to the essential drama. So something like Nietzsche and the Burbs, there's just an immense amount written. And it's always a question for me of cutting, getting down to the essential drama. If I didn't do that, I'd be a Bernhard imitator.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't want to be.
But there's something super interesting about one of the things I love about your writing generally, and in particular it works well in this book, is that so much of what happens on the page is not what's literally happening in the room. It's about thoughts about what might have happened or what isn't happening, or it's about, and adolescence is a brilliant space for this because there's a lot of boredom, a lot of speculation, a lot of big talk, not as much action, and that kind of makes a lot of sense for the way that you write. So how do you know what's essential?
Selecting what's important for a scene is very difficult. There's one scene where, I think I might read it tonight, I'm doing a reading tonight in Hackney, and it's where the characters are waiting for the new lead singer of their band, which is Nietzsche himself, one of their classmates. The characters are waiting for their new lead singer to come along and begin singing for the first time. And it's all about what the characters do, just hanging out. So one of the things they do is they lark about. They run up to one of the characters' parents' bedroom, and they go through the drawers looking for sex toys. Then they start drinking. Then they're discussing porn they looked at when they were younger. Then they talk about madness. And each of those sections was part of something much larger that I just spliced together. I cut and then spliced into a series of prose bits, and I've combined it into one piece. So that's what I'm doing a lot of the time, is just taking all things from all over the place and then putting them together to construct a scene. Likewise with the ship, what I was doing there is just trying to think of a through line of imagery. I had all kinds of wild and crazy things in the original work I wrote when I was describing the ship, but it's too diffuse. You need a simple through line of imagery, and once you find that through line of imagery, you can discard so much and just concentrate on that. It's
really propulsive, those sections. They really kind of pull you through, these multiple iterations of an idea, which is kind of jazz-like, isn't it? These ideas of like varying on a theme.
Absolutely, it's like modal jazz. In modal jazz, you improvise over, a couple of chords or maybe a chord. Someone like John Coltrane can spend a whole side of an LP improvising over, a couple of chords, a chord. And the thing is to find something which will allow you to improvise, to find some riff that can then form the basis of your improvisation. So that's the question for me: is finding something which will give me that ability to open this out and make it kind of wild. And then to control that wildness and give it a kind of succinctness, to cut it off when it's got to a certain point.
So if you write longhand, you then do some editing as you're typing it up, or when does that editing process happen?
What I do with editing, I just write a bunch of stuff in the notebooks, and when I'm feeling totally dead at work, I'm just really tired of doing lots of admin and management stuff and filling out Excel spreadsheets, I'll put on some DVD. I buy these DVDs in charity shops, put one of those on, and I type up 4,000 words. And that's how I do it, just every few days I'll type up 4,000 words, or I'm feeling particularly dead, 8,000 words. It's something I do when I've got nothing else going on. And then I've got a Word file full of material. For the new novel I'm working on, I must have 800,000 words by now.
Wow.
And a lot of that is all quite carefully ordered. It's all sorted and grouped and processed. And then once I get a chance to actually begin this novel, it's been quite frustrating lately because I haven't had a chance to begin. Once I get a chance to begin this novel, what I'm going to do is just move things around, assemble scenes out of this material. I've got so much material, hopefully that shouldn't be something which is too difficult. I can pull together all kinds of stuff and assemble a scene out of various disparate things that I've written.
And where's the next novel going to be set?
It's set in Manchester.
In Manchester.
So it's set in Manchester, and it's my favourite setting I've ever written. A lot of it takes place on what's called the Ees, and the Ees spelled EES. It's a real place. It's in Chorlton, which is in the suburbs of Manchester, and it's just an open place with a big lake in the middle. but in the novel it's become something pretty wild. It's similar to what damp becomes in Spurious, but this is much more so. So I'm pretty damn excited to get working on this stuff, because the East is, I find it quite an intoxicating place to write about. So the East is just this sort of post-industrial, in the novel, a post-industrial landscape in which you'll find a sofa sitting in the middle of everything. You'll find some stuff there that's been dumped, fly-tipped, all kinds of crap. You'll find some sort of old buildings that the characters can wander into. And what I'm doing when I'm writing about the East, I'm drawing on Tarkovsky's work, the filmmaker Tarkovsky, and in particular Stalker. And the idea is, for my characters, at the heart of the East, there's the room. They don't know where the room is. They're not sure how to find it. But the room will be that place where they get their secret wishes. Whatever wish they have is going to come true. Now in the novel, I'm playing this for laughs in many ways, and it's clear the characters don't take this entirely seriously. But what the East is allowing me to do, and what the room is allowing me to do, is really bring these characters close to what they ultimately want, what they ultimately desire, and they can sit around talking about this. So the East is just my absolute favourite place that I've ever written about. I'm just really excited. I can't wait to get going on the novel. But the problem is, for various reasons, various other things are coming up. It won't be until after Easter that I can get going on it, really.
Is that because you studied in Manchester, right?
That's right.
So is the East a place that you actually know from your time?
Yeah, I know really
there?
well. Yeah, sure.
What is it really like?
It's a pleasant leisure area.
That's good.
It's a nice lake. You walk around there. People walk their dogs around there. It's very nice. And it's interesting because there's other bits of it, sort of meadows. I'm never sure what they're called, whether they're part of the East or not. And in those meadows, you'll see bits of old buildings. The River Mersey runs through it. You can get quite lost in some of the woods there, even though they're quite small. And I always love going there. Manchester's very built up. And it's one of the few places you can go out and have a taste of the countryside. And there's a lot of people I knew who were unemployed, alcoholics, all kinds of things like this. And we'd often go for a wander in the middle of the day. We'd wander through the East and talk about stuff. And that's what I was trying to remember. In fact, the novel, Simone Weil, is all about a friend of mine who died a couple of years ago. He died young. And he's an alcoholic, lifelong alcoholic, great friend of mine. And we spent a lot of time together. And he would live periodically, when he was vaguely sober, in my house. So he had one of the rooms in my house. I lived in a really wild place. And, he died, and I was trying to think about our friendship and all the stuff we did together, and all that time we passed doing nothing in particular, wandering through the East. He had a great knowledge of nature. He knew all about nature. He studied nature. And he could tell you all about the trees and the birds and the animals, all kinds of things. So it's really a novel remembering my friendship with him, just as my first three novels are all about friendship with a guy called Will. This novel I'm writing is all about my friendship with Rob and my sadness that he died young. It's a terribly sad life he had.
How old was he when he died?
50, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, he was someone who was quite vibrant. He came to visit me in Newcastle before he died, and he was doing okay. And yeah, it's a very, very sad thing. And what can I say? I mean, a whole world disappears when someone dies. And it's all this banter and the fun that we had. We lived in this crazy house full of monks. So for after a few adventures in Manchester, I ended up living in this house where, I don't know how you can present it. It's like an ark that helped people drowning in life. And I was one of those drowners. I moved in, I lived there for 7 years.
Wow.
And all kinds of people lived there, from all walks of life, all kinds of people. The guy who owned the house was a very charitable, very kind man, a very religious man, very devout Christian. Not in an oppressive way, not in trying to convert you sort of way. I was very impressed with his Christianity and what his Christianity meant in terms of his real commitment to people around him. And a lot of us ended up living there from all sorts of different backgrounds, and we got on really well, and we hung out a lot, and we had a lot of fun there, really. And at the same time, it's full of monks and full of choirs, and it's one of the most amazing places to live. I tried to write about it directly, but actually it just sounds so implausible. But curiously enough, one of the people that lived in an early incarnation of that house was Howard Devoto of Buzzcocks.
Oh, no way.
Strange but true, yeah. And he is writing a book about it, or at least he was when I last saw him.
Wow.
So he lived in a version of this house, not in that house, but in an earlier house, but the same sort of feel. And he was right. He came up to visit us in Manchester as part of his research for this autobiography he was writing. So it may well appear, it may well come into print in that house. I found it very hard to write about it, but I'm trying to in the new novel.
You're from Wokingham originally.
That's
you
right.
grew up there.
Yeah.
So that's like a kind of real place that you're mining for fictional capacity. And then Manchester, I guess, is the same. Was it? I guess there's none of that in Wittgenstein Jr. though, because
Wittgenstein Jr. I thought, okay, what I'll do after writing my first 3 novels, which are auto-fictional, and they're all about my friendship with a guy called Will, and our adventures in the world of academia, and those three novels. At least the first one was written as these events actually unfolded. I never intended them to be a novel at all. Never even thought about it actually, and then eventually I decided, well, this material would make a novel. After writing those 3 novels, I wrote Wittgenstein Jr. I thought I'll set it somewhere I've never been. I'll write it about a philosopher whose work I don't really feel very connected to.
Oh, really?
I'll write about people who, I'm just not like those people at all. I thought I'd just do that just for kind of fun. So I used Google Maps to look through Reading, and I read loads of books about Eton and other things to get my characters. So it was kind of holiday from what I normally wrote about. And it's kind of funny because people will tell me that I got the geography of Cambridge completely wrong. But I find that quite entertaining, So I put a college there. There's no college there. It's kind of fun because the publishers took me to Cambridge as part of a book tour just to show me it.
Yeah.
One of the people who worked at the publishers, she'd been at Cambridge, so she took me there and gave me a tour of the place, which I really enjoyed. But it didn't resemble Cambridge in my imagination whatsoever.
Oh, it's interesting you say that you don't really connect with Wittgenstein's philosophy.
No, I remade it in my own image.
Ah, okay.
So I studied Wittgenstein as an undergraduate, and as an undergraduate I loved it in the context of what I studied at that time. I studied analytic philosophy, which can be quite dry and arid, and I love Wittgenstein's work in that context.
Ah, okay.
But then as a postgraduate, I moved into continental philosophy, and I drifted very, very far away from Wittgenstein. So in writing that novel, I was really trying to revive my early enthusiasm for Wittgenstein, but I found it quite hard to do, just not because of Wittgenstein himself as a philosopher, just because he didn't really fit in with what my interest, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of him. So what I did, I read Wittgenstein through the work of other thinkers, Pierre Hadot, the great French classicist, who wrote a book called Philosophy of Spiritual Life. It's a wonderful book. And this book is all about attempting to revive a tradition in Greek philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, where a philosopher is tested not by their work, but by how they live. And Pierre Hadot actually has an article on Wittgenstein as someone who attempted to live his thought. And that I thought was a very interesting way into Wittgenstein's world for me. The other thing I did was to, and this is one of these big influences on my work, was to just read Agamben's work in general, which I always find very intoxicating. And in particular the book on Paul. So when I was thinking about Wittgenstein, I was thinking about Paul in the book on Paul, and I tried to remake Wittgenstein in that image as well. So what I was doing with Wittgenstein was turning him into someone who I could have some sort of handle on. I was also reading extensively in Wittgenstein's work. I was trying to read his work, reread it, rethink it, recast it in a way which I might recognise and be able to work with. So the Wittgenstein I come up with, I'm not sure how strongly he resembles historical Wittgenstein, but he's someone who I was able to work with him. I was able to feel with him. That novel for me, it was always a love story from the very beginning. I wrote the end of it first. The end part of the novel is the stuff I wrote first, the love affair stuff. And Wittgenstein, that whole novel was for me about making my readers feel something really acutely. I wanted to make the readers feel very, very acutely the love that Wittgenstein needs, the love that he finds, and what it meant that he had to leave this love behind.
Have you ever read any biographies of Wittgenstein or any of?
Yeah, certainly. So the Great Monk biography, it's a wonderful, wonderful read. The late Brian McGuinness, he only died a couple of weeks ago. Wonderful biography of the young Wittgenstein. Yeah. And after he wrote that, I was waiting for the second volume, which was rumoured to appear. It never appeared. I love his volume on the young Wittgenstein, which I read when it was first published in the 90s. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff. There's a huge collection of memories of Wittgenstein by people who knew him.
I've heard you mention this before.
Yeah, it's huge.
I haven't read that, but that sounds amazing.
It's wonderful. By Flowers. Flowers was the original editor. It's been re-edited. It's actually been enlarged in the last couple of years. I haven't seen the new version. It's by someone actually based in Newcastle. I forget his name. And he brought out an even longer book, Reminiscences of Wittgenstein. There are other books you can draw on as well. Rush Rees has an edited collection. And in that, there's the reminiscences of I only know his surname, Drury. Was it Maurice Drury? And Drury was a friend of Wittgenstein's, and I actually borrowed the format of the dialogue with Wittgenstein from Drury, and many of the speech patterns, and many of the incidents I borrowed from that. Also, several wonderful memoirs of Wittgenstein. Von Wright, who was a Finnish philosopher, he's got a brilliant little book about working with Wittgenstein, and there are actually many others. So I read everything I possibly could. You know, when I'm writing these novels, I read an awful lot of books. I read all kinds of things by Wittgenstein, on Wittgenstein's life, and it's very similar with Nietzsche as well.
Because Wittgenstein and Nietzsche, they struck me as the most obvious candidates for a comic novel. They're both pathetic, not in a pejorative way, but in a way that makes you kind of feel a lot for them. Like they're both kind of failed over and over again they tried, and as you say, they kind of tried to live their philosophy, but they failed over and over again. Like the stories about Wittgenstein, whenever was it Norway he used to go back to over and again?
That's right.
And him trying to feed the birds, but the birds dying, or this really kind of sad stories.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche, of course, like the great irony of his life, of him ending his life in a kind of a comatose after having a breakdown. I don't know Simone Weil at all.
Simone Weil, is it?
Simone Weil, sorry.
Extraordinary life. Oh my God. You know, the biography, there's a wonderful biography of her. I forget, it's written by a friend of hers, and the name escapes me for some reason. And it is so utterly moving. And her notebooks, which she wrote just before she died at 34, so young. Wow. Her notebooks, the last notebooks, and they're to be distinguished from the other notebooks, which aren't as good, but the last notebooks, I find them unbearable to read. They're so profound, so rich, so wide-ranging, and they're on so many different topics. They show her brilliance off so wonderfully. I find them almost unbearable to read. I really find it very, very hard to read her. For me, her favourite work. And Simone Weil died at 34. She starved to death.
Wow.
She starved herself to death. She refused to eat more than, I think it was prisoners in the work camps. She refused, or I think it was the work camps. Anyway, maybe prisoner of war camps. I think that was it. She refused to eat any more than they did, and it exacerbated an already a condition she already had. I think it was tuberculosis. And she died of it at the age of 34 in Ashford in Kent, of all places. She was at Middlesex Hospital, then moved to Ashford. And it's the most extraordinary life. I'm not sure whether these thinkers can be regarded solely tragically. There's something about the glory of their thought, something so wonderful about their thought. And the feeling I have is that they could only have thought it given the lives that they led. And that thought is so wonderful.
So there's a kind of reversal there that the way I phrased it was as though they'd failed to live their philosophy, but what you're saying is possibly the philosophy could only have come from that understanding they gained, or the wisdom they gained through their
Absolutely,
living.
and there are many philosophers like this. I mean, Deleuze was very ill for most of his adult life. Maurice Blanchot was extremely ill from his adolescence onwards. He lived to a great age, but he was very, very unwell. You read accounts of him now that are emerging. This guy was lying in bed all day. I mean, these people are really unwell. But that failure of health, as Deleuze writes in his work, that failure of health can be a condition for writing. It's what can allow you to write.
I've been reading a lot about, I can't remember whose idea it is, but biomorality. Have you heard of this phrase before?
I haven't, no.
It's a kind of neoliberal injunction or collapse of morality and health. So
No, I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, so the idea that it's wellness, it's self-care, it's, I can't remember what you have in Nietzsche and the Burbs, but they have a happiness class or something like that.
They do indeed, and this is exactly the kind of thing I was striking against. Yeah, I found that in the work of Alenka Zupancic.
That's it, that's who coined the term biomorality.
That's right,
it.
I remember reading one of her books, and I thought it was fantastic as a term. And the idea that it is your moral duty to actually be well, and if you're not well, it's a moral failing. And these are revolting doctrines. These are appalling doctrines, and they're everywhere, all about us. For me, some of the great, terrible moments of the last 20 years, the end of people being able to smoke in public places. A university campus that bans people smoking.
Can you not smoke on university campuses now?
Many of them you can't. Certainly now ones you can't. I mean, it's a campus. It's open air. Why can't people smoke there? And the attacks on drinking. This is why I write a lot about drinking in my work. Is because the attacks on drinking are absolutely extraordinary. In general discourse, intoxication of all kinds is something frowned upon, and I find that absolutely appalling. We have a Puritan culture when it comes to intoxication. People no longer drink at lunchtime. I'm half Danish. In Denmark, you drink in the winter. You have gamle dansk. You have a spirit in the morning to get you going at breakfast. Just to get you going in the cold weather. And you'll often have a drink at lunchtime. You go to Portugal, there are places in the streets, there are stands where you can have a spirit, a shot. It's called ginginha, I think, in Lisbon. And you can just go there at lunchtime and have a shot of something or other, a shot of a spirit. Wonderful. And the idea you can't do this and it's frowned upon. And for me, it's just horrifying, our sober world.
Even in England's drinking culture, it was puritanical even when it drinks, like our drinking culture is based around the build up to Friday night when you release and then you purge for the week, or you pay for your sins or whatever on the Monday morning in your pain.
Yeah, it's a very good point. European style drinking. I write about the Poles. Their drinking is spurious. The Poles. We were over there in Poland in 2001. A bunch of us. It was wonderful. We had a fantastic time over there. The Poles were amazingly hospitable. We should see them drink. They weren't like us. We were frenzied. We were going wild with our drinking. They just drank slowly through the whole night. 5 a.m., 6 a.m., they're still drinking. This drink's of honey liqueur. Very nice, And they'd be drinking that, and we'd all have fallen on the floor. We were in such a terrible state by that time. And that pacing, that calmness about drinking, that tranquility, it reflects the way in which drinking is part of a culture over there. And same with Ireland, same with many of these countries. Whereas in Britain, we have that fraught relationship to alcohol. We had the licensing laws, which meant the pubs close at a certain time. You'll get in as much as you possibly can within a short window of time. Appalling.
I don't know. It's got its own. I just think it has its own kind of peculiarity. I went to Poland in 2013, and we were amazed at how cheap beer was. And you couldn't really buy someone a beer as an act of generosity because it was so cheap. You had to buy the vodka.
Yeah.
But they also had these. Do you drink Polish lager? There's a kind of range of Polish beers, and the Zubra, I think, is very high percentage lager. And we found it really cheaply at this place that we eventually found out everyone in town called the Bum Bar, because it was where the homeless people and the street drinkers went. And there we were, these artists on residence, drinking with the homeless. It was really nice.
Wonderful.
But yeah, it was a really nice culture.
Well, in Poland, what I remember particularly is travelling across from Warsaw to Wrocław, where we had a conference there. And on the train, you sit in these tables and people would bring you beer. You sit there, you order beer. What a fantastic way to pass the time, These are the arts of conviviality. My worry is the arts of conviviality are being lost. They're being trampled out. The conviviality of the working class is being deliberately destroyed, in my view. And the conviviality of the middle class is being eaten away at. You read Daily Mail or The Guardian, it's all about the problems of drinking too much. If you have one glass of wine a day, this is what it will do to you. I find this Puritanism absolutely repugnant.
I think that biomorality really captures it. The way that as soon as that idea is present in the culture, things that previously were unimaginably separate from capitalism, like sleep health and clean sleeping, this idea of cleanliness, this idea of purity, entering even ideas of unconscious, like being unconscious. Right. It's just becomes a moral act. It's crazy.
You're working, just Jonathan Crary, isn't it, in 24/7?
Oh yeah,
you work in your sleep. It's a wonderful book, actually. So certainly, absolutely. There's biomorality. This is all about management. Politics itself has become a matter of management and administration. The big political ideas seem to have fallen away. The way in which what Foucault might call governmentality functions is through management at every level. Management not solely through official state institutions, but other institutions as well. So everything's about management. And even now, the whole discussion of climate change in the media is about the management of climate change and techno-fixes and what you might do to solve this issue, as if it was an issue that could simply be solved. So everything's about this solution talk, this management talk, and this is something which works at the level of our elected bodies, but also, in our ordinary everyday lives. This is governmentality saturating everything with management, with self-management, and I find this absolutely abhorrent.
I wanted to ask you that Richard Branson crops up loads in the book as a kind of a comic figure of capital, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't know what Richard Branson has always made me laugh as a figure. But I don't know, why is he so comic? What's so funny about Richard Branson?
I guess Richard Branson is just so over-eager.
Yeah,
he's an eager guy, and he's got this very positive business philosophy. And the idea for Richard Branson is, he wants to make us all entrepreneurs. And that he presents himself as someone who's like us in some way. So for him, the solution to all life's problems is entrepreneurship. And what I love is the way in which, and this is all from Hello magazine. I used to buy it every week as research. And in Hello magazine, there's a whole story of Richard Branson's son, who's called Sam. Sam's marriage to Isabella something or other, Calthorpe. I don't know, she's got 3 different surnames. She's from one of these ancient families. I loved all this idea of the entrepreneur and his family getting in with the royal family.
Yeah.
And there you have this our neo-feudalism, where the big entrepreneurs link up with the old established powers, and they constitute this new layer of horror in our society. And I think with Branson, you get the sense in which he feels he's some kind of exemplar for us. But it's also the way in which Branson is used. When I was at school, we actually did have a young enterprise class.
Oh, yeah.
And we actually did watch videos, as they were then, video cassettes, of the lives of amazing business people. So this was actually something really quite real.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this we actually went through this stuff when I was at school. And people we were supposed to imitate.
I can't remember who said this, but there's entrepreneurs who've come from fairly humble beginnings. They're such outliers. Everything about their careers is completely unique to them. And they're also the people who are least able to analyse that correctly because they're the ones experiencing it. So even in business terms, I think they're generally felt to be the only people you shouldn't listen to because they can't give you any real advice on how business really works or on how they got to where they did because their whole career is proof of the fact that that's not how the world works, right? Like Branson's kind of a, what's the word, countercultural beginnings or whatever, being involved in the music industry are completely different to his situation now of like making money out of the failure of privatised rail companies over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. So these people, someone like Branson comes from the counterculture, and he was lucky when he was young. A few strokes of luck, Tubular Bells, that recording by Mike Oldfield made them a great deal of money, made Virgin a lot of money, and you could do a great deal with that money. So what the entrepreneurs tend to forget is that opportunity they had, often countercultural, often funded by governments, if it's in the area of tech, that is not something generally available today. These spaces are closing down. And in general, if we compare the 70s and 80s to now, the 70s and 80s were much more random and chaotic and unmanaged. There was still this lively countercultural forces were still in play. So things could actually happen then. You had dole culture, you had squat culture. And these things are dying, they're shrinking. And when you don't have that kind of those opportunities for living without earning a regular salary, then you close down all kinds of creativity. The same creativity on which the tech giants, on which people like Richard Branson depend.
You used to be an academic philosopher at Newcastle University.
Yeah.
But you've switched. When did you switch to becoming a reader in creative writing?
Well, about 5 years ago. So I was in philosophy for many, many years, but institutionally it was incredibly frustrating. A lot of what I was doing as academic philosopher was management and administration, and trying to struggle to keep philosophy open, to keep philosophy going. We were actually restructured in about 2004, and philosophy was moved, would you believe it, into chemical engineering, into the School of Chemical Engineering. And these sorts of decisions make it very hard to practice any kind of philosophy. This kind of absurdity, I'll write about it one day. This kind of absurdity was the background for my writing Spurious, Dogma, and Exodus, my first 3 novels. Day-to-day absurdity was so great that I just turned to writing as a way to keep myself sane in the middle of the madness. And then, I've moved now to a department of creative writing, and my colleagues are fantastic, we're treated very well, all is easy and straightforward. My colleagues in philosophy, I should say now, as soon as I left, they were moved into the humanities. So, there we are. As soon as I left, almost immediately.
It was your presence that dragged them into chemistry.
But, I was battling against senior management constantly. These are very, very stressful and difficult things. I used to wake at 2 a.m. just from sheer stress before meetings and preparing for these meetings. This was it. And Spurious and the other ones were written in the midst of that. That situation. So they come out of that experience.
Doesn't W become, he has to say, kind of position as a philosopher of physiotherapy or something?
Well,
what
again,
is it, sports science or something?
There's legal reasons here, I can't talk about this.
Okay.
But where he worked, there were some interesting things that happened. And I say, I'll leave it to your listeners to infer the veracity of what I reported in the fiction. But yeah, you could not write about these things. You would not be believed, things that occur in universities.
I remember when I was at art college, they were constantly trying to shut the art department down. And we would get people coming around the studios checking that we were using them because it was felt to be unused space and uncommodified. But then I think the Chancellor changed, and they realised there was actually quite a lot of money. I think it shifted over at that point to research, and they realised they could make a lot of money out of doing PhDs and MAs in art.
Sure.
Suddenly loads of money went into the art department. And it's so strange that in this managerial culture, the whims of the managers matter so much. You would think it would be much more impersonal, but actually sometimes it's the kind of personality of the person who's meant to be a neutral technocrat.
Yeah, it's a feudal system.
Yeah.
These are our lords and ladies. These are our masters, and we their whims are things we watch out for. We hope that things will go well for us. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will.
It's like the rise of the royal. The royals never really bothered me, but in the past few years they've been so closely tied to exactly what we're talking about. This kind of new feudalism or new medievalism, where they've become like what celebrities were in the early 2000s. They've become the most important things to people, but also allied to weird political moments as well. Do you still read celebrity magazines? Do you still
I gave them up last year. Must have been about December.
Why did you give them up?
Well, they're kind of boring.
Yeah.
They became it's like that new movement of kindness, which was kind of, this idea of Hello Magazine was having or promoting kindness, and it became even more banal than it was previously.
Yeah, you have to have some cruelty in there, otherwise it's not really worth.
There's always some sort of implied cruelty, but I keep up with celebrity gossip. I think these things are very important to read these to read trash, to read tabloids, to read trashy magazines. I think it's really crucial to keep on top of this stuff because so much is happening of interest in these magazines, and I draw from that in the fiction.
Yeah.
All the time, I'm drawing on what I read in Hello Magazine and the fiction.
I was just wondering because whenever you begin to, I'm thinking of what I do as well. When I tend to take things from life. And whenever you take from life, you somehow take a bit of your life that was previously free and kind of, I'm thinking of like wandering around and chatting with friends or shooting the shit and not doing anything, and you turn it into work. I wonder if is there any bit of your, because now you're going back through your own history and you're using your knowledge of philosophy and you're using your knowledge of your adolescence and stuff. Is there any bit of your life that is left for, I don't know, just kicking about? Do you still go on long walks? Do you still do these things?
I do a lot of walking around, and I spend a lot of time doing nothing in particular. But the fiction that I write, Nietzsche and the Burbs, none of the characters resemble anyone I've ever actually met.
Okay.
They're all made up, and the new novel, the characters are all made up. It's actually really hard to write from life because it's unbelievable. The things that happen are unbelievable. I can't give an account of that house I lived in Manchester.
Yeah.
It's just too crazy. It's just too odd, and no one would believe it. The things that happen there.
Yeah, there's no through line sometimes with the life, is there?
There's nothing. And likewise, the life I led in something like Newcastle, all the chemical engineering years, you couldn't write about it. No one would believe it. It's just too odd. There's no points of orientation. There's a wonderful autobiography by the jazz musician Art Pepper. And Art Pepper's autobiography is really, really a wonderful read until he enters into some weird commune for about 200 pages. And in those 200 pages, I just got totally lost, and I don't know how to understand what's happening to Art Pepper. And it's similar when I write about things I've experienced that I've undergone. If I write about them literally, you lose a reader. That no reader's interested in this stuff. So what I do, I make up completely new characters. And Nietzsche and the Burbs, no one in that novel resembles anyone I've ever met. And likewise, Simone Weil novel, no one resembles anyone I've ever met. So I think in that sense, real life as I experienced it all those years ago is untouched. It's untouched, really.
The Spurious trilogy, it was autofiction. It was pulled from moments of your life. Do you still note these things down?
Not that much, really.
Okay.
So that was hanging out with my friend Will, and I think I must have started writing that in about 2003, writing bits of it. And I had this blog. The blog itself was called Spurious, and it's a very serious project for me. It was totally anonymous, and I was just trying to write a massive textual object, which would explore. I don't know how. It's hard even to explain. It'd explore philosophical things, artistic things. You'd have a visual component, musical components, written components. There's going to be some massive object on the internet that I'd simply launch off. I thought of myself as an outsider artist, and I was going to spend my whole life at it. And as part of this project, which I didn't tell anyone about, it's totally secret, as part of it, I wrote a comic strip, and the comic strip was the W stuff. That was supposed to make people laugh. So at the blog, there's about 1 million words of the blog. When I finished that project in about 2007, 1 million words online. The blog tended to be not very humorous, and the bits that everyone wrote to me about were the W bits. People really got a following. The other stuff which really got a following was when I was giving an account of the damp in my flat, which was quite real and spurious, a total real account. I had this damp taking over the flat. It was completely crazy. And all these people who were experts on damp would come around and say, it's this. And we'd begin trying, I'd get workers in and they'd fix it for me. The whole kitchen was replaced. The plaster was replaced in the living room. I had this party once to celebrate the end of the damp. And then in one tiny corner of the living room, a tiny speck of damp appeared. The next day, the size of a tennis ball. The day after that, it was like a basketball. And it spread and it filled the whole room. And this was brand new, newly plastered walls. And it went on for ages. And I found it quite entertaining, as well as it being rather a pain. And the air was so damp, you couldn't believe it. It was, and then, the damp spread everywhere. It got even worse. In the bedroom, I pulled away a wardrobe and it was just thick with green damp. The whole flat was just, and it's full of spores, these tiny snails. It was pretty extraordinary. So these things were taken from the blog. I'd write about that at the blog, and people would write to me saying, "How's the damp going?" and "How's W?" So over the years, it built up that readership, and eventually, my life circumstances changed. I wasn't living on my own anymore. I didn't have that amount of time, so I really felt it was time to draw it to a close. And as part of that, I thought, right, this W stuff would make a nice novel. And I put together Spurious.
So you finished we kind of finished up with the blog before you started putting together the novel. Oh, I didn't know that.
That must have been about, I don't know, I was writing the novel about 10 years ago. It must be 2008, 2009, somewhere around then. A publisher had written to me saying, in fact, several publishers wrote saying they were interested in publishing parts of the blog. And at the time, one of them wrote, I was actually thinking, okay, maybe I'll give that a go, And I took about 10% of the material from the blog, and the rest of it was new material, but very much in the spirit of the stuff from the blog. And that's how the Spurious came together, it came together in that way. I'd never had any ambition to write a novel, when I was writing the blog. The blog was the actual thing I was doing. I didn't want to be one of these people who thought publication was the be-all and end-all. The blog itself was the thing. Yeah. And even now, because what happened was the blog became, it was de-anonymised because of the success of Spurious and the other novels. It was de-anonymised, and I put links there now to interviews and so on. And I still meet people quite randomly, really, and they'll tell me about the blog and about reading the blog, and it's wonderful to talk to people about it. It meant something to me.
There was a kind of utopian aspect to blogging at that point. I did various blogs around that time, and it's that feeling that you could just be totally anonymous, and now again it's like capital has kind of chased down these spaces, and now it's probably a way of, I don't know, showcasing your potential for writing a book or for being a screenwriter or something.
There'll be a great study written by someone or other one day of the blog era from 2003 to about 2010, because so much stuff came out of that. K-Punk, someone like Owen Hatherley, there's a whole bunch of people who came out of that movement, and the way in which publication was possible. There's also amazing disappeared blogs like Young Hegelian, Anti-Gram, these wonderful smaller blogs that, I never really found out who wrote them. They came and they went, and they were so fantastic. So there's a real cultural history to be done of that moment, which was an extraordinarily exciting moment. I owe everything as a writer to that period. If it wasn't for that period, I never would have written anything. I never would have written the novels.
Thanks so much to Lars for speaking to me. Make sure you follow the Bad Vibes Club wherever you get your podcasts, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.